What's up, everybody? Yeah, welcome to the Mike Dolce Show. I am Mike Dolce, your host, here to bring you the most honest, actionable, and evidence-based information to dramatically improve your life. Today, we're talking about Mr. Joe Rogan's recent comments on weight cutting. Is Joe right? Is Joe wrong? Is Joe kind of somewhere in between? Well, I'm going to break that down for you. Now, I have to be conscious of the Spotify, YouTube copyright. So I mean no disrespect. I'll host just tiny little clips in the video, so I'm not trying to piss anyone off. But Joe makes some good points, but I really want to add more context because I don't know that he has the full picture here. So thank you for being here. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Only give this video a thumbs up if you appreciate the content and it adds value, but definitely leave questions below this video. This channel is fueled by you and your questions. Let's get right into it. Recently on the Joe Rogan Experience, Rogan was talking to Chito Rivera. Chito Rivera, you might know, has a recent win over none other than Sugar Sean O'Malley. So in conversation, weight cutting came up. And Rogan said, basically, weight cutting needs to be abolished. The UFC needs to stop weight cutting. Athletes need to stop weight cutting. And basically, and Joe's right.
It's the worst thing you could ever do 24 hours before you have a fight.
Joe's right here. So let me show you where he's right, and then I'll show you where maybe he went a little bit wrong. He says, cutting weight, completely dehydrating yourself, depleting yourself on the eve of the most important athletic competition is ridiculous. It makes absolutely no sense. And I agree with Joe 100%. When you're cutting weight improperly. And that's the issue. The vast majority of those inside combat sports, and Lord knows I've worked with all of them over 20 plus years, the vast majority of the athletes in the team simply have no idea how to cut weight properly. Now, let me remind you, the Dolce Diet is the only elite weight management team in the history of combat sports with a 100% success ratio. Never in the history of our entire career have we ever, not once ever, had an athlete miss weight. And I will remind you also, we worked with the worst of the best when it came to weight cutting. Athletes like Thiago Alves, Johnny Hendricks, Quentin Rampage Jackson, just to name a few. And Lord knows there's so many on the list that Vitor Belfort, missed weight at 196 pounds catch weight versus Rich Franklin, hired us the very next fight. We got him at scratch 185.00. His wife, Joanna, broke down crying, hugged me, said, I am their angel, because he looked so healthy at 185 when he was damn near dead at 200 pounds to fight previously. So I say that just to give context. And when I speak, this comes from a guy with experience and a team with the scientific merit to make these statements. Now, Joe goes on to say that in his mind, number one, the UFC needs to have weight classes every 10 pounds.
I think the UFC needs two things to happen. They need more weight classes.
That way the athlete can get their weight on track. It's easier for them to make weight. And that's not exactly a good point, because the UFC does have the 115, the 125, the 135, the 145, and the 155-pound weight classes. Then they go up a little bit to the 170, 185, then 205 and 265. I've always been an advocate of putting in a 225-pound class. You can maybe add one or two weight classes in there. So I don't totally disagree with Joe, but I kind of do, because the UFC already has these weight classes. We see athletes damn near dying at 125, at 135, at 145, and at 155. So the spread in weight classes isn't going to do it. And another valid point I will put forward is boxing. Boxing, sometimes the lighter weights in boxing, there's a 3-pound spread in boxing. Weight classes are 3, 5, 8 pounds apart. And these boxers missed weight all the time because human nature. This is it. Humans will always do whatever they think they can do for some sort of benefit. It's the perceived benefit. Much of my career, we've always focused on what we call the 52-week weight cut, getting athletes to live a healthy lifestyle year-round, to Joe's point, allowing them to much easily manage their body weight. So then it's a very soft landing at the end. And I will say, our athletes for the last, let's say, 5, 8 years of our in-depth, hardcore working with all the UFC athletes, our athletes weren't cutting weight anymore. We were actually feeding the athletes as they got closer to the scale. The athletes started the rehydration process the night before weigh-ins. So Joe does make a good point also, where he talks about the IVs being taken away. And I agree. I was the only advocate, I believe, of the well-known established coaches that pushed back against USADA, simply because it does not support the science. Let the IVs be back there. Let the USADA officials oversee the IV. Let medical doctors determine on a case-by-case basis if individual athletes should get an IV or should they orally rehydrate. Why is this? Well, let me explain it to you. Have you ever gone on a date with a pretty girl and you just really couldn't eat? Have you ever been so excited about a function or a presentation that you had to put on at work and you really couldn't eat very much? You couldn't eat, you couldn't drink. You got a little bit of, quote, stage fright. Well, we see this all the time with athletes. Once they cut weight, they make weight, they get on stage, they weigh in, and then they have that face-off with their opponent. This is a massive adrenaline dump. Many athletes simply cannot orally rehydrate efficiently in that, first 2 to 12 hours post-scale. This is where an IV just makes perfect sense. And we said, let USADA do it. The UFC can certainly afford it. Get a medical team on staff, sat there. USADA officials can oversee the administration. This is for athlete health and safety. And what I said years ago, back in 2014, 15, I said, if the organizations actually cared about the health and safety of the athlete, they would allow medically supervised case-by-case intravenous rehydration to protect the health and safety of the athlete. Cheeto goes on to talk about the reduction in fluid around the brain. And that is very true. And now here's another part too. Joe says, so here's what Joe said. Let me wrap this up. He said, number one, make weight classes every 10 pounds apart. Number two, abolish weight cutting completely. Well, that's not possible.
And they need to stop cutting weight.
Because then we have, what do we have? We have Henry Cejudo fighting Francis Ngannou. If there's no weight class, honestly, if there's no weight class, how do we get these matchups? There has to be some sort of criteria. The weight class is the only one that makes sense. So in a perfect world, sure. I mean, the European style, a lot of the European athletes, and we work with many European combat athletes, they don't really cut weight very much. Now, they get undersized and they get blasted out by the Americans on the international level in combat for the most part. That's true. Anyone who knows this, we work with athletes at the Olympic Training Center at the Oregon Project over in Nike. This is just the way it goes, right? Cutting weight properly, managing your health properly, working with a highly advanced team who is experienced, and check the resume. There's a lot of fools and pretenders, hashtag zero integrity George, right? The worst record in all of combat sports. More athletes missed weight, were pulled from cards and hospitalized with that guy than anyone else, which is crazy. I'm surprised people don't talk about that more often, but definitely go on Reddit, dig around Google. You can see where those bodies are hidden. Fools like that really make the athletes look bad. The athletes are well-intended. The athletes do what their coaches tell them by and large. Unfortunately, the athletes are working with the wrong coaches. Now, I don't want to be working with athletes. My career is far moved on. We do some consulting. We recently worked with Eddie Alvarez, who's competing over in ONE FC. And ONE FC, by the way, is a joke. I have 13-year-old varsity wrestlers here in New Jersey or out in Iowa that know without even calling me how to game the ONE FC hydration test, right? The Andy Foster California State Athletic Commission, their multi-point weigh-in schedule is so funny. I laugh at how easy these are to game for someone like us legally. By the way, not cheating. It's so easy to just legally create a state of being for the athlete to pass these tests with flying color and then certify 12, 18, 20 pounds or more below the weight class that they even need to be at. Super easy stuff. I don't know if I'll do videos on that because in the wrong hands, right, this information might not be helpful. But what do you guys think? Leave comments below. Number one, Rogan, I appreciate what Joe's saying. I agree with Joe in that I hate seeing athletes suffer. I hate seeing them suffer on the scale, but most of the time the athletes are suffering on the scale because they're listening to idiots like a George Lockhart. You look at when Khabib Nurmagomedov was pulled from the card and hospitalized and said he almost died. Well, that was George. You look at Mike Chiesa getting missing weight dramatically by like 6 pounds and getting beaten half to death. Well, and said he almost died. You look at what happened to Paige Van Zandt. She said she almost died. You look at what happened to Chris Cyborg. She almost died. What happened to Ray Benoit? Well, he almost died. What happened to Max Holloway twice? Well, he said he almost died. This is all while working with George, and these fights were horrific. So I would blame that guy more so than the weight cutting system and the conflation of what these coaches say that they can do. We have a team of registered dietitians, exercise physiologists, and certified trainers here on staff. We have PhD candidates that work in our research department. We do absolutely nothing unless it is evidence-based. But dare I say, very few teams have the amount of experience that we have. I've been doing this since the 90s at a very high national level, working with collegiate wrestlers in the 90s. By the way, and then Team Renzo Gracie, late 90s, early 2000s, when this was still NHB. And then I was hired in 2004 by Randy Couture's Team Quest Portland, Oregon, to be the head strength coach for that team. So as I stand here right now, I got a lot of street cred. To wrap this up, and I don't want to bash George. He deserves it, but there's a lot of other idiots out there also. What I suggest for the athlete is focus year-round on their health. Most athletes, they go into training camp for 8 weeks. It's basically fat camp. They cut weight. They damn near die. Hopefully their opponent does the same thing. And then who knows what happens afterwards. Then the athlete goes and they binge their whole life, and they just get horribly fat and out of shape, and they stop training, and then another fight comes up. So they're constantly yo-yo dieting effectively. So you can't really blame weight cutting. You have to blame the athlete for their unprofessional antics in the off season. And that's where I will hang my hat. What do you guys think? Leave comments below this video. Do you agree with what Joe is saying? Do you kind of agree with the point that I'm trying to make here? I don't necessarily disagree with Joe. I do on the weight class issue because there already are the 10 pounds, and those athletes already miss weight, and they miss weight in boxing with smaller intervals between the weight classes. And then how do you organize fair competition if there's not a weight class? So both those points, they unfortunately, they really don't make sense. So there you go. Any questions, again, leave them below. I appreciate you being here. And until next time, boom.